Hey everybody, my name is Paul Eston Jr., aka Boy Green. I'm the New York Jets digital reporter for Heavy.com. We're streaming live simultaneously in 3 different places here on a Wednesday afternoon. The Heavy on Jets Facebook page, over 20,000 New York Jet fans. Thanks for stopping by. Also on my YouTube channel, youtube.com/BoyGreen25, and on Twitter, branding baby, of course, at BoyGreen25. And we got a very special guest as we turn the page from that great Packers win in Lambeau. Tasty. But now the Jets will head back on the road to Denver to play the Broncos. And every time the Jets and Broncos play, I have to go to my main squeeze for all things Broncos. That's Phil Milani, who is the team reporter for the Denver Broncos. Let's go live to the Broncos facilities. We got that Phil joining us. What's up, Phil?
Hey, what's happening, Paul? Look, I wore my green shirt for you today, so
I appreciate that.
Yeah,
Very
I'm
nice, very
go.
fitting. Yeah, and nice. I like the background there. Yeah, you really set us up here. Very nice. I love it.
I go big for you.
Yeah, and we always know it, Phil. We appreciate that, buddy. Let's dive into this, Phil. What the heck is going on in Denver? 3-game losing streak, massive expectations, of course, heading into the season. If you could pinpoint one thing, or maybe it's multiple things, what's the commonality in these losses as of late?
Well, there was so much expectations heading into the season. Of course, the Broncos make the huge trade in the offseason, going and getting Russell Wilson. And I think that probably the biggest issue right now with this Broncos team is how is Russell Wilson and what he liked to do for 10 seasons in Seattle, what it was that made him Russell Wilson. How is that meshing with new Broncos head coach Nathaniel Hackett, what he likes to do, what he wants this offense to look like? Of course, he's coming from Green Bay and, the Matt LaFleur, Sean McVay type of an offense. They had so much success in Green Bay with Aaron Rodgers. So what he likes to do, what he brought from his past, what Russell Wilson brought from his past, they're trying to mesh those two things here in Denver. And it hasn't gotten off to a great start here. Of course, the Broncos are 2-4. They're the lowest scoring team in the NFL. That's probably the biggest reason why this team hasn't got off to the start that they wanted.
Are Broncos people waiting? Because I saw Benjamin Albright, another good buddy we should have on later this week as well. He tweeted it out ahead of the Monday Night Football game, Denver short week, obviously for this Jets game. And he said that it's almost like waiting for the bottle to pop. Like the Broncos offense is just going to explode. They just got too much talent. You mentioned Russell Wilson, Cortland Sutton, like man, and you had Javonte Williams. We'll get back to that later. But even still, even with the injuries, there's so much overwhelming talent. Is that what Broncos people are waiting for? That eventually it's just going to pop? Or there's just been a lot of games of this gradual wear and tear? Like, where is it?
Most definitely. I think that you've seen some great flashes. I mean, against the Chargers on Monday Night Football, Russell Wilson starts the game 10 of 10. Everything is looking great. He's getting out of the pocket. He's throwing the ball deep. I mean, he looks like Russell Wilson. And then all of a sudden something happens and they fall off. The Broncos only had 15 yards passing in the second half and overtime. I mean, that is mind-boggling, Paul. I mean,
that's a wild stat.
I don't understand it. So there is this thought that, like, hey, you've seen the flashes. Now can they just do it consistently? And, yesterday we heard from Broncos head coach Nathaniel Hackett. He said consistency is the biggest thing they're focusing on right now, is just how do they have this sustained success over the entire 60 minutes? The weird thing is, like, the Broncos are 2-4. You would think that this is just not a very good football team, but there is this belief that, like, hey, if they just get this thing to click, they could really go on a run, And so there is that feeling, like, just waiting for this thing to happen. I think the Broncos might have to be waiting longer than expected, especially now with Russell Wilson. He'd been dealing with a shoulder injury. Finally seemed like maybe he got over that. And then, of course, hurts his hamstring against the Chargers. So some major injury concerns with Russell Wilson, and that might just delay the progress of this offense.
And that's an even more bizarre thing, because not only is Russell Wilson, so when he's acquired, of course, the massive expectations, but him himself, he was an Iron Man before last year, getting injured really for the first time in his entire career.
Yeah, I mean, he plays that physical style of football too. I mean, he gets out, he's running down the field, he's, playing outside of the pocket a lot. he's taken some big shots here. He was sacked 4 times against the Chargers, 4 times against the Colts the game before that. I mean, he's taking some shots. And yeah, I mean, up until last year, he had just you've been able to sustain those things, keep playing. But I think that he's played a lot with injury in his career. I know that he's suffered some knee stuff and was able to play through that. So I do think that he's played with injury in his career. But yeah, now, as age catches up to you, this is his 11th season. I know the Broncos want him to play in the pocket more, try to get him to be a little bit safer in there, but that's just not who he is. I mean, that's not where his strengths are. So for him to be him, he's got to play that physical style of football. So I think that's another thing the Broncos are trying to weigh is how do we protect this guy, but also let him do what he does best.
And let me ask you about this, Phil. And this is a question we've even gotten about Zach Wilson a few times and Joe Burrow. I remember when we were getting ready for the Bengals game. Are the sacks that you just mentioned that Russell Wilson is taking, is that the offensive line, or is that Russell Wilson, who we all know likes to do the Russell Wilson magic, where he's moving and grooving and obviously putting himself in more favorable positions to be sacked?
I think that there's no doubt that Russ likes to hold on to the ball. I mean, he's not really this timing quarterback where, boom, 1, 2, 3, bam, the ball's out of his hand.
Right.
That's not really what he likes to do. He likes to hold that ball and wait and, sort of dance around and make things happen, let Russ cook. That's sort of the idea.
Right.
Behind some of the things that he likes to do. But I will say this Broncos offensive line has really struggled. There's been massive injuries across the front there. A couple of weeks ago, Garrett Bowles breaks his leg. That's the Broncos' best offensive lineman. He's done for the season. There's been some other injuries. Quinn Miners, their starting right guard, he missed a bunch of games with a hamstring injury. So there has been some issues up there. But even maybe more than all of that, it's Russ communicating with his offensive line that has been maybe the major issue in my eyes. The other night against the Chargers, they blitzed up the A-gap twice, and both times Russ is either not detecting that pressure coming, or I don't really know how to explain it. I mean, he must be just thinking about other things before the snap. Maybe they're not getting to the line of scrimmage early enough to be able to detect some of these things, but it was fairly obvious. I mean, Derwin James is coming after him. You would think you'd be like, hey, let's make sure this guy doesn't come through here untouched. But that's been happening where they're not identifying some of these issues before the snap, and Russ is just taking it head on.
And something else I noticed, tell me, Phil, if this was just a prisoner of the moment, because I have not got to see every Broncos game this year, although the NFL wants me to with all the primetime games you guys are getting. But I will say in the Chargers game in particular, it seemed like they being the Broncos offense in terms of their concept, were really trying to use Russell Wilson either in RPOs or just designed runs. And that's something I'm like, wow, because I remember in the latter years of Seattle, they really went away from that of really running him. You could see that in some of the statistical measures. So that seemed like a sticking point. Is that something the Broncos want to do, or is that kind of spur of the moment inside the Chargers game within itself?
I think that was an adjustment inside that Chargers game because he was getting a lot of pressure. And so I think one of the ways they felt like they could combat that was making those guys on the edge, make Khalil Mack, make him think a little bit, hey, who has the ball here? I think that was one of the adjustments they tried to make. And I think it might have been on one of those plays where he did hurt his hamstring. So I don't think the Broncos want to do that with Russ. But at some point they were like, hey, we've got to try to adjust here and make sure that these guys aren't just teeing off on Russ. So I think that was just an adjustment. They're not trying to do that with him. But that's something that Russ can do. They were able to get a first down that way. That was something during that point in the game where the Broncos offense just had no chance of staying on the field. They just have been going 3 and out a lot. So they were like, let's just try and see if Russ can try and do something with his legs a little bit there. Not something they want to do moving forward.
Yeah, and that seems to be the other injury, too, on the shoulder one. It seemed like when he was reaching for the pylon on another scramble. But again, the hard thing with the Broncos is that's Russell Wilson's superpower. So to try to take that away is like telling Russell Wilson not to be Russell Wilson, and that's the reason they traded for him in the first place.
Exactly. And that might be something that has to come up this week, with Quinnen Williams coming after him and that Jets front. He might be dancing if he is able to play in this game. I mean, I do think that hamstring is significant enough where he might not practice. We'll have to see the Broncos practice a little bit later on today. But I would imagine that this thing might lead it right up until Sunday or one of those Adam Schefter tweets at midnight, something like that. That might be when we find out if he is able to go in this one. But if he is, which I'm sure that he'll push to want to be able to play, that is something the Broncos are going to have to figure out. How can we protect this guy?
If he's unable to go, and again, we're not making any declarations here. We have no idea of practice, and as you said, it's likely going to go all the way till the first whistle before we even know really or not if he's going to play. But if he does not, a name was floating around on social media that Jet fans are a little too intimately familiar with, probably more than they want to be, and that is Brett Rippon, the guy who, of course, beat the Jets in prime time that other Jets-Broncos game. Would he be the guy that would step in if Russell Wilson was unable to go?
You would assume so because he's the backup quarterback. He's on the active roster. The idea was that maybe Brett won that backup job from Josh Johnson. Josh Johnson, a journeyman backup quarterback around the NFL. I'm pretty sure he's close to have been playing for all 32 teams. He's played in the CFL. I mean, this guy, he's had 3 different stops with the 49ers during his tenure. So this guy's familiar to having to step up and be the guy after being a backup. But it looked like Brett Rippon had beat him out. He was the backup quarterback, or he is the backup quarterback right now. I do think that it would be him, but Nathaniel Hackett talking yesterday said that they have 2 options here. So it was sort of an interesting comment from Hackett. Just you would assume that it would be the backup, but he did float the idea that it could be Josh Johnson. But yeah, Rippon, I think if he's the guy, he's more of a pocket passer, on-time kind of guy. He's been in Denver for a while now. Broncos fans are certainly familiar with his game a little bit there. And he's growing and he's developed into what I think could be a solid backup quarterback. So I do think it would be Brett, but Hackett just made me pause a little bit enough with his comment yesterday that it could be Josh Johnson, who would be a little bit more mobile. He'd be able to run around a little bit more, give you a different dynamic than Rippon, who would probably stay in the pocket and be more of that traditional quarterback where he's trying to find guys on time.
Hashtag Jets revenge game, perhaps, for Josh Johnson, the former Jets quarterback, one of apparently 4 billion teams that he's played for during his long and storied career. Again, we're speaking with Phil Milani here. He is the Denver Broncos team reporter here on the show. Make sure you follow him on Twitter for all the latest with the Broncos. Get their perspective heading into, of course, Jets game week. And make sure you guys like the video, hit subscribe down below for more great New York Jets content. Now, Phil, the thing that I think a lot of people would bat their chest about is, Jets 3-game winning streak. Oh, look, Broncos 3-game losing streak. Teams heading in opposite directions. But mind you, Phil, I'd like to bring up this statistic I tweeted out earlier this week that on top of those 2 statistical nuggets for this season, Broncos country has won 5 of the last 6 matchups against the Jets, including outscoring them in the both inside Denver matchups 49-0. And so I have to ask you, Phil, what magic do the Broncos have in Denver, mile high? What is about all of that apparently is a mysterious cloud that the Jets can't penetrate?
Oh, well, the Broncos do like to make it known that, hey, you're playing at a mile high. Right outside the locker room, on the way from the visiting locker room out onto the field, there's a huge sign that says, hey, you're playing at 5,280 feet. So elevation sickness. They play this video during the game, that, hey, this is real. You get winded when you come out here, all of those things. But, I mean, I do think Broncos fans, Broncos country, they have a long tradition of making this a really tough environment. It'll be interesting to see how Broncos fans react this week. Just like you mentioned, the Broncos coming in with a 3-game losing streak. If you listen to talk radio in town this week, if you pay attention to, Twitter and that type of thing, I think Broncos fans' patience is wearing thin here. Even earlier in the season, a lot of booing as the Broncos, go into the locker room at halftime even. I mean, I
Wow.
think that the losing seasons have really caught up to the Broncos where fans are at their wits' end here. And, with Russell Wilson and all the expectations coming in, a lot of people around here thought, okay, the losing is done. This Broncos team, all they needed was a quarterback. So now we're behind. That's behind us. This team's ready to win. And because of the 2-4 start here, fans are upset in town, and they want to see success. So I'm interested to see what the atmosphere is like in the stadium on Sunday. But yeah, traditionally, this is a tough place to play. And you mentioned the last several games against the Jets. I think Peyton Manning was around at the start of that streak there. So
Yeah.
he probably had a little something to do with it.
Yeah, well, let me ask you, what's the pulse? Is it desperation at 2-4? Is it anger? Like, to your point, like, is there a little bit of that, both whether from the fans or from the team? What are you sensing?
Definitely anger. I mean, there is a lot of anger in town. A lot of people want to see heads roll even just 6 games into the season. But I will say this from a positive perspective, if you tend to be a glass half full kind of guy, the Broncos have a chance if they take care of business here in the next 2 weeks, they could get back to 4-4, and then it's the bye week, maybe a chance to reset in that situation. That would be definitely a positive perspective. But I think when you lose 3 games in a row, at that point, you're like, gosh, can this team beat anybody? So you don't want to take anything for granted. You ought to definitely take these next 2 games really seriously. You got a hot Jets team in that has been maybe one of the surprises so far this season. They've been playing well. Joe Flacco got things started there. Zach Wilson comes in. This is a good Jets team. I think the last thing Broncos fans want to do is see Sauce Gardner running around like maybe he's got a Broncos hat on this week.
Oh yeah, I've seen those out there. Yeah, that's true.
You don't want to see that if you're a Broncos fan. So, but I think that if you're taking the optimistic approach, there is a chance for the Broncos to get back to 500, hit the bye week, hit the halfway point of the season, and then say, look, if this, like we talked about earlier, if this thing clicks, there is a chance that this team can go on a run. The defense is certainly good enough. They've been playing lights out here. Pat Surtain II, maybe the best cornerback in the NFL right now. They have the pass rush up front with Bradley Chubb. So there's an idea that, hey, if the defense keeps playing like this and the offense can get this thing turned around, then maybe this team could go on a run. But we just haven't seen it. So I would say that fans, they have no more patience. They're angry, and they want to see this thing turn around. And gosh, if it doesn't happen on Sunday for this Broncos team, it is going to be a long stretch here until they get through this season.
It very much could. And again, if Bronco fans want to be optimistic, just look at that defense. You just mentioned some of the key pieces of that unit. I mean, they've been absolutely spectacular. And I want to ask you, Phil, that what has it been? I know Pat Surtain is a lockdown corner and he's fantastic. Are they just great against the run? Are they just really good at pass rushing? Are they just good at everything? Give us the dynamic here of this Orange Crush Broncos defense.
I would say that their strength is in the secondary. I mean, you got Pat Surtain out there, Justin Simmons,
of course,
at the safety position. Kareem Jackson is a veteran in this league. They went out and got K'Wan Williams, who's a great nickel cornerback. They did lose Ronald Darby earlier this year with an ACL injury, but they have a up and coming rookie, Damari Mathis, who he had 4 pass interference calls. Against the Chargers. So definitely teams, and I expect the Jets to continue to do this. They're picking on him just because he's a rookie. You got Pat Surtain on the other side, so you're naturally going to want to go after Mathis. But I thought that Mathis really stayed in the game, had a short memory there, made a big fourth down stop late in the game against the Chargers. So he's a guy that the Broncos are pretty high on. A lot of athletic ability there. He was a press corner in Pitt, so he's just used to sort of playing that way, but he's adjusted well to what the Broncos have been asking him to do, and he can be expected to get picked on here moving forward. But yeah, that secondary is probably their strength. Up front, Bradley Chubb has been great getting after the quarterback. here. He had a big game. You mentioned that Thursday night game a few years ago. I'm sure Jet fans still remember that.
Yes.
They have Randy Gregory on the other side, but he's on IR right now. And in his place is a second-year player, Baron Browning, out of Ohio State. Last year, he actually played inside linebacker. They thought maybe his skill set fit better on the edge, and he's transitioned really well. Us around here, they've been saying they're using him kind of like Micah Parsons with the Cowboys, where he's running all over the field. He could play inside. He could play on the edge. They're going to try and move him around a little bit and just sort of see what he could do, use his athleticism. And he's been a big surprise for the Broncos so far this year. Inside.
Go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
No. Let's hear on the inside. I'd love to hear the inside of defense. What's there?
Inside, they're excited about DJ Jones. They went out and got him from the 49ers. And also Draymond Jones, a guy who's playing on the last year of his contract. So he's been trying to prove his value here for the Broncos, and they're going to have their hands full trying to stop the run against this Jets team. I mean, obviously Hall had a huge day against the Packers last week, and then Michael obviously can do Michael Carter can do a lot back there too. So.
Well, I'll use that Michael Carter transition. I have more questions on the defense, but I'll use Michael Carter to get to Javonte Williams. What a devastating injury. I had him on my fantasy team. I thought he was going to be a superstar. So I was waiting. Speaking of waiting for that thing to pop, I thought it was inevitable that he was going to become this transcendent superstar running back. Unfortunately, injuries happened there. How big of a loss has that been for the Broncos, and how have they managed since?
It's been a huge loss. I mean, the Broncos were really high on him this offseason. We actually went out and did a whole feature on him in his hometown. We went to North Carolina and did all this stuff because the Broncos really thought he was going to become this superstar. We even stopped by at UNC, talked to Mac Brown there about Javonte Williams. He was like, hey, don't forget about Michael Carter too. He's getting it done up there in New York. So he brought him up there.
Awesome.
But yeah, they thought that Javonte was going to be a huge part of this offense, not just running the ball, but even in the passing game, they thought he was going to play a big role too. So that was devastating. You feel bad for a young kid just in his second year. And it wasn't just an ACL. I mean, he tore a lot in that knee. It's going to be a long road to recovery. So that was a huge loss for the Broncos. Melvin Gordon was the backup to him. They were splitting carries, really, those first few games. But Melvin has a problem holding on to the ball. Several fumbles here to start the season. The Broncos went out and got Latavius Murray from the Saints practice squad. He got the bulk of the load against the Chargers on Monday night. And Melvin Gordon was on the sideline, kind of looked like he was starting to get a little bit frustrated there. Nathaniel Hackett said, hey, it's not like we benched him or anything. He's still going to be a big part of this team moving forward, but it certainly did not look that way. So not sure what to make of that. Hackett says, hey, I'm going to talk to Gordon. I'm going to let him know that he's still going to be a part of this team, but it certainly looked like he was benched in that game. Latavius Murray really handling the bulk of the carries there. And then the Broncos also have Mike Boone, who's sort of a change of pace back. But those are the three that the Broncos are riding with right now.
All right, let's go back to defense real quick. And right before we get you out of here, that Pat Surtain, is he a corner that stays to one side? Does he shadow? Is he responsible for shadowing one receiver and he just blankets him the entire game? Or is there a little mix of both?
Good question, because he's done a little bit of both so far this season. At the beginning of the year, when Ronald Darby was healthy, he was primarily staying on one side, and he was just sort of taking away that half of the field.
Right.
On Monday night, he was really following Mike Williams around. Williams was just targeted 5 times in that game. So that sort of tells you the respect that Justin Herbert had for PS2 on that side. It'll be interesting to see how the Broncos use him moving forward. There were a couple of times where they're playing zone, and Mike Williams was running through the zones and got open there. But, yeah, they did try to move him around and have him blanket Mike Williams. That was sort of a new thing for Pat. And moving forward, I do think they're going to continue to use him that way and just say, look, let's try to put you on the other team's best wide receiver. If you could take him out of the game, that's going to allow the defense to do some other things there. But he was on an island. I'll tell you what, they were letting him just sort of, handle that workload with Mike Williams. And that's a lot, asking for a lot, from a second-year player. So they clearly think he can handle it, but that's hard, especially when you're not getting those targets. It's hard to stay locked in, when the ball's never coming your way. So we'll have to see what they do with PS2 moving forward here.
It will be very interesting with the Jets because they don't really have a clear wide receiver one. Corey Davis has been the most productive, but Garrett Wilson was the 10th overall pick in the draft, and Elijah Moore saying that he's not getting enough looks, and I imagine Michael LaFleur may immediately respond by giving him looks. So it'll be interesting to see where PS2 ultimately resides, which I guess a first world problem for the Jets, that who knows who he could be on, because there's not just one guy you have to stop from that perspective, but he's been absolutely spectacular. Phil, before we get you out of here, what's your gut say? Are the Broncos going to fight out of this? Because to me, I don't just see a 2-4 football team. I see a super talented team that's got Russell Wilson still at quarterback, along with talent all across the team. So this is always a scary one where you don't just judge it based on what's been happening and what is going to happen. What does your gut say? Did the Broncos fight back in this one and get back to their winning ways?
Gosh, I think that this is going to be a battle. I mean, I think that it's going to be a low-scoring game. I mean,
yeah.
I don't see this Broncos team all of a sudden coming out and putting up a ton of points. I just, at least until I see it, I'm not going to be waiting for it. I mean, through these first 6 games, I was like, all right, this is the week that it's going to happen. I'm done thinking that way. So until I see them put up like 27 points, I'm not going to bank on it. So I think the Broncos probably somewhere around 16. The interesting thing about the Jets, they put up 27 last week, but of course they have the block punt. Our old friend Will Parks picks that up and takes it into the end zone. So he's going to be coming back to Denver. I'm looking forward to seeing him out there. So you think, oh gosh, they had this offensive explosion, but they were really, finding points other ways there too. So I really think this is going to be somewhere in the teens. I'll say 16-13 Broncos, just because I got to be a homer on here.
Of course. How could you not? You got all the Broncos stuff behind it. I mean, come on, Phil. You got the paychecks for Pete's sake. That's true. You have a great balance, which we appreciated all your insight. Phil, I love every time the Jets and Broncos play. You're always the guy I go to, and for good reason. Spectacular insight. Thank you so much for jumping on with us. We appreciate it.
Paul, I always appreciate your time, and likewise, I look forward to these matchups because I know during the week I get to talk to you.
Amen. I love it. All right. Well, good luck on Sunday, and we'll see who comes out of this one in that wonderful high-scoring shootout. It should be a doozy.
Thanks, Paul. Appreciate it.